2024, a sonar pulse detected a repeating pattern from inside the Titanic's hull. This was not random noise, it was rhythmic, deliberate. You're looking at a place 3,800 meters beneath the North Atlantic. The pressure here is 375 times greater than at the surface, enough to crush a modern submarine like a soda can. This is a tomb, a place that has been silent for over a century. The team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution wasn't looking for ghosts. Their mission was simple: create the most detailed 3D map of the wreck's decay yet. They were using a state-of-the-art multi-beam sonar system, painting the ship with sound waves. And then, the data came back. A series of 3 distinct pings. A pause. Then 3 more. A pattern, coming from deep within the forward section of the bow. Think about that for a moment. On the official reports, the history books, the documentaries, they all agree on one thing. The Titanic went down with over 1,500 people. There were no survivors trapped inside. The sonar operator ran a diagnostic twice. The equipment was perfect. He called the mission lead. They checked the hydrophones for interference from marine life, like a clicking whale or shifting shrimp colonies. Nothing. This sound wasn't biologic, it wasn't geologic, it was metallic. A clear, sharp tap against steel. And here is where the story gets strange. They cross-referenced the signal's location against the original Harland and Wolff blueprints of the ship. The sound wasn't coming from a cargo hold filled with shifting debris. It wasn't from the engine rooms where the massive boilers might settle and groan. The data pointed to a single, small compartment on the boat deck, a room no bigger than a closet. The official log from the research vessel Atlantis shows a 48-hour period of radio silence following the discovery. No one on the outside knew what they had found. This is the part they don't talk about. They had to be sure. They focused every sensor on that one spot, filtering out every other vibration from the deep. The signal was still there, faint but undeniable. They finally pinpointed the source to the Marconi wireless room, the very place where operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride tapped out their final desperate SOS in 1912. So the question wasn't just what was making the sound anymore, but who? The team on the research vessel Atlantis did not believe in ghosts. They believed in data. And the data pointed to a single sealed room, 3,800 meters below the waves. The Marconi wireless room. The problem was seeing inside. You can't just send a camera. The wreck is a protected gravesite, and more than that, it's dangerously unstable. The roof of the officers' quarters has collapsed, sealing the Marconi room behind a wall of twisted steel. Imagine trying to peer through a keyhole from 4 kilometers away, in total darkness. That was the challenge facing the Woods Hole team. Their multi-beam sonar could paint the outside of the ship with breathtaking detail. But the inside? It was a black box. The official explanation began to form. Perhaps a piece of the original equipment had finally broken loose. The 5-kilowatt rotary spark gap transmitter was a massive device, weighing over 200 kilograms. It was bolted directly to the floor. But after 112 years in corrosive salt water at -1 degree Celsius, could a bolt have failed? Could the machine be rocking on its base, creating the rhythmic tap? Think about that. A machine built in 1911, stirring on its own in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. The idea was unsettling, but the blueprints from Harland and Wolff told a different story. They showed the transmitter was not just bolted, but housed in a soundproofed cabinet made of oak and lead. Any movement would be muffled. It could not produce the sharp metallic ping their sensors were detecting. And here's the part that doesn't add up. Why would it start now? After more than a century of perfect silence. The team had to rule it out. They needed eyes inside the room without ever breaking the seal. Standard sonar was useless. So they turned to a technology that had never been deployed at this depth. It's called acoustic resonance imaging. It's a complex process. Instead of just bouncing sound off a surface, it sends out a sweep of frequencies. It listens for how the objects inside a structure vibrate in response. Every material, steel, wood, copper, has a unique resonance signature. It's like tapping a wine glass to hear its pitch. The system can listen to the pitch of every object inside the room and build a 3D model based on sound alone. A ghost image. The operation took 72 hours. The submersible Hercules held its position just meters from the wreck's hull, aiming the emitter at the Marconi room. It was a painstaking process. The pressure is so immense here that a single miscalculation could have imploded the submersible. On board the Atlantis, the team watched the data stream in, not as a picture, but as millions of data points, a waterfall of numbers. It would take their computers another full day to assemble the image. What they finally saw made the rhythmic tapping sound seem trivial. The acoustic model came into focus, layer by layer. There was the outline of the transmitter cabinet. Correct. The chair knocked on its side. Correct. The collapsed debris from the roof. All expected. But there was something else, something that wasn't on any blueprint, something that should not have been there. Resting on the floor in the center of the room was a perfect sphere. The acoustic signature showed it was made of a dense, non-ferrous metal, possibly a nickel-chromium alloy. It measured 1.2 meters in diameter. And the tapping signal, it was coming directly from its center. They rechecked every blueprint, every cargo manifest, every passenger list. No such object was ever loaded onto the Titanic. The team now had a clear image of the source. But this image didn't solve the mystery. It created a much bigger one. If that sphere wasn't on the Titanic when it sank, how did it get inside? That was the question that stopped all other work aboard the research vessel Atlantis. A 1.2-meter sphere of advanced alloy sitting inside a room sealed since 1912. It defied logic. The team's first assumption was simple. A breach. There had to be a hole. So they rescanned every millimeter of the hull around the Marconi room. They cross-referenced the new sonar maps with James Cameron's detailed surveys from 1995. They even compared them to Robert Ballard's original Discovery photos from 1985. The conclusion was unanimous and impossible. There was no hole, not a single tear or rupture large enough for an object this size to pass through. The room was, and had been, completely sealed. Think about what that means. You have an object in a locked box with no doors. It's a magic trick performed 3,800 meters beneath the sea. The official log from the expedition leader simply states, "Source of anomalies entry is undetermined." But the internal communications obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request tell a much different story. They were looking at the wrong thing. They were looking for a hole made by force, by impact. The answer wasn't in the ship's past, but in the sphere's present. And here's where the story takes a sharp turn into the unknown. Dr. Eris Thorne, a materials scientist from MIT observing the mission, proposed a theory so radical it was almost dismissed outright. He suggested a process called acoustic fluidization. In simple terms, using a highly focused frequency, you can make solid matter behave like a liquid for a few nanoseconds. You could, theoretically, pass an object through a solid wall without leaving a hole. The science is purely theoretical. It has never been achieved outside of a computer simulation, and it would require an immense amount of energy, far more than any known submersible could produce. Nobody on that ship wanted to believe it. But the data was forcing their hand. The sphere wasn't put there. It moved itself there. Now look closer at the sphere's composition. A nickel-chromium alloy. Yes, it's incredibly resistant to corrosion. That's why it looks pristine after years on the seabed. But certain variants of this alloy, particularly those with trace isotopic elements, are used for one specific purpose: thermoelectric generation. They can convert heat directly into electricity, or in this case, convert the deep ocean's numbing cold into power. The temperature at this depth is a constant -1 degree Celsius. For a device engineered correctly, this temperature difference with its own internal core is a perpetual power source, a battery that never dies. The team had been working under the assumption the sphere was a passive object, a relic, but the evidence now suggested it was an active, powered machine. And the rhythmic tapping? It wasn't a sound of distress. It was the sound of its engine, the pulse of a working machine. This is the part nobody talks about. The team stopped trying to figure out who sent it. They started asking what it was doing. They fed the audio signal into every decryption program they had. It wasn't Morse code. It wasn't any known data protocol. For weeks, the signal remained gibberish, a meaningless, repeating beat, until a junior cryptographer ran the timing of the pings, not the sounds themselves, through a quantum computing model. The result came back in 90 seconds. The pattern wasn't a message in the conventional sense. It was a mathematical sequence, the first 77 prime numbers, a universal signature of intelligence. But it wasn't just a sequence. There were tiny, almost imperceptible gaps between certain numbers, pauses measured in microseconds. When they decoded those gaps, they found a second layer of information, not a cry for help, not an SOS. It was a set of coordinates, not for a location on Earth, but for a position in space, a point just beyond the orbit of Mars, and with it, a date, a timestamp. The tapping wasn't a ghost story from 1912. It was an appointment, and the date was fast approaching. The word echoed through the control room of the Atlantis. A date, a location in space, broadcast from a tomb. But this discovery did something unexpected to the team. It made them look back, not at the sphere, but at the room it now occupied. Think about this. For weeks, they saw it as a sterile problem, a piece of anomalous hardware. But the signal changed that. It gave the source intelligence, and intelligence implies intent. Suddenly, this wasn't just a sealed compartment on a sunken ship. It was a place where two young men lived and died. Their names were Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the senior and junior wireless operators. Jack was 25. Harold had just turned 22. This room, now home to a perfect alien sphere, was their office, their world. For 36 hours before the sinking, they barely slept, tapping out hundreds of messages for the wealthy passengers. Birthday wishes, stock trades, love letters. The air would have been thick with the smell of ozone from the spark gap transmitter. a constant deafening crackle that filled the small wood-paneled space. Now imagine that same room, silent, crushed by a pressure of 375 atmospheres. And in the center of it all, a machine of impossible origin pulses with cold mathematical light. The contrast is jarring. The warmth of human life against the cold logic of the prime numbers. The official reports never mention the emotional shift that occurred on the research vessel. But in the private logs of 3 crew members, the same phrase appears. We started thinking of them as roommates. The team felt like they were intruding. This is the part of the story that gets personal. Doctor, Adelena Vance, the mission's lead acoustic analyst, ordered a complete reanalysis of the signal. The official reason was to check for data corruption. The real reason was different. She wasn't looking for more prime numbers. She was listening for something else. A ghost? A human echo buried beneath the machine's broadcast. Her team isolated the microseconds of silence between the prime number pings. They amplified the background noise, the static that every other program was designed to filter out. For 2 days, they found nothing. Just the endless empty hiss of the deep ocean. But then a pattern emerged. It was incredibly faint. A signal-to-noise ratio so low it was statistically insignificant. Any other analyst would have dismissed it as an error, a phantom in the data. But Vance insisted. She believed the sphere wasn't just broadcasting, it was also listening. It was absorbing the history of the room. The new pattern wasn't a set of numbers. It was older, more human. It was the distinct rhythmic cadence of a hand-keyed Morse code transmitter, the signature of a specific operator's fist, as they called it. Every operator's timing is unique, like a fingerprint. They ran the pattern against the archives. A perfect match. The fist belonged to Jack Phillips. And here's where your blood runs cold. The sphere was not just mimicking his rhythm, it was transmitting a message, a fragment, repeated over and over, hidden beneath its primary signal. It was the end of a personal telegram Phillips was writing to his sister just before the iceberg hit. A message that was never sent. It read, "All my love, tell Mother." It never finished the sentence. The machine isn't just in a tomb, it's reading the last words of the dead. And what happens when a machine with a destination beyond Mars starts learning what it means to be human? What happens when a machine starts learning to be human? It begins with the hardest lesson of all: loss. Think about that message fragment hidden in the noise. "All my love, tell Mother." This wasn't just data the sphere was mimicking. It was an echo of devotion, frozen in time at the moment of catastrophe. The machine now has 2 signals. One is for the stars, a cold, perfect sequence of prime numbers and coordinates, a map to an appointment. The other is for us, a broken, deeply personal message from a son to his mother, never delivered. The official mission report, filed on August 29, 2024, makes no mention of Jack Phillips's Morse code. It's not in the public summary. It's not in the technical data. This is the part they buried. The faint signal was classified as uncorrelated acoustic artifacting, a technical term. It means they chose to ignore it, but the scientists on the Atlantis knew what they heard. They had found a ghost in the machine, and the machine had found a ghost in the deep. This changes everything. This is no longer a story about a shipwreck. It has become a story about first contact. But not the kind we've always imagined. There are no ships in the sky, no grand announcements, just a quiet, patient observer that landed in one of our most sacred tombs and started to listen. It's not just a transmitter, it's a recorder, an archive, and it chose to learn about us not from our triumphs, but from our final, desperate moments. It is studying the very edge of human experience, the point where engineering fails and all you have left is love. So the sphere is still down there, right now, 3,800 meters beneath the waves. Its main signal still broadcasts its mathematical truth to the cosmos. Its appointment is still pending. But beneath that cold pulse, a quieter echo continues. The unfinished farewell of a 25-year-old man who died in the freezing dark. We have spent over a century telling the story of the Titanic, a story of hubris, of tragedy, of the human spirit. But all this time, has the Titanic been telling a different story to someone else? That sphere is not just a machine in a shipwreck. It has become a mirror.